Advanced directives are where you actually make decisions ahead of a need. So you're actually saying, if I am terminal, if I am end stage, if I am persistent vegetative state, this is what I do and I do not want in my care. So you're taking those specific decisions and outlining them very clearly and expressing your wishes. There is something called a DNR, do not resuscitate order. That's a medical form. I want to make sure I make clear on that. That is a form signed in the state of Florida. I'm going off my information from Florida here. But basically, it's signed by your doctor saying, based on your medical diagnosis, we are now putting in your chart an order not to resuscitate you. It's similar to, not comparable, but saying, I order a CAT scan, I order an MRI, it's an order. And it's put into your medical chart that now we will no longer resuscitate you. The advanced directives you'll do with estate planning say when basically you want that to be in effect. So if I reach this point, if this occurs, then I no longer be resuscitated, and the doctor would then review your wishes and say, we've now met this criteria. Anna will no longer be resuscitated from this point forward because these were her wishes and we've now met that scenario that she wanted this to apply. So it is different from a DNR. Many of you may have those conversations because you're facing terminal matters. That's perfectly fine, but an attorney will not create a DNR for you. It will outline when and if you would want one to appear. A DNR itself will be done by a doctor or a hospital.
And that essentially takes the pressure off our family then.
Yeah.
Kind of, sort of, correct?
I do think a conversation is extremely helpful still, but yes, without a doubt, it takes the pressure off. But keep in mind, we can't create a document that covers every medical scenario that may occur. I mean, a lot of you are dealing obviously with cancer issues, but there could be car accidents. There could be COVID-19. I mean, whatever appears in the world. So we can't manage every scenario. So it's going to be fairly broad. So it depends on what you're looking for. As Amy is asking, does it take the pressure off of your family? Absolutely. But we're talking about actual, for lack of a better word, pull the plug scenarios, not who's going to be in their room, how are my final hours going to be. That's not what we're dealing with. So you have to look at what your wishes are as far as, do you feel strongly about that you want to make sure your family know about? So
you see people adding COVID addendums to their advanced directives, if that's changed the conversations that you're having?
Not particularly, because COVID is not a terminal matter specifically. It can become terminal, but it is not a terminal diagnosis, if I can use that phrase. So the care that you're looking at is based on the diagnosis, not on the treatment. A lot of people think that the advanced directives are based on the treatment. Now, there are things we specify out if there's a religious belief and, you know, no blood transfusions or certain types of treatments. We can certainly deal with those specifically. But in general, you're talking about the diagnosis and when you want the treatment to stop. That's the kind of scenario you're looking at. So we haven't had as much with the COVID concern. The concern with COVID is people who had zero estate planning and now they are essential workers. A lot of doctors, nurses, healthcare providers, especially in the first couple of months when people were, you know, living apart from their family and were very concerned because they had nothing in place. You know, we wanted to jump through hoops to get those documents in place for them, but not specifically around the COVID. We're not seeing as much of that.
Mm-hmm. What about dementia? Are you seeing anybody adding anything specific to dementia, or for our purposes, if there are brain mets and that impairs your brain functioning, do you see anybody adding anything specific there?
Just as a precaution for not only, you know, the family, but for the client, we will have a physician enter some sort of letter saying whether they are still competent to make legal decisions. Because I can see a client and have a perfectly candid, very lucid conversation, but then find out they get home and they're not competent for whatever reason. Lucidity is not an ongoing situation. It can flux, as I'm sure you understand. So I guess I'd have to ask you to kind of expand your question a little bit, Abigail, because I want to answer it as far as, you know, the dementia part in general doesn't affect the heart and lung function. So a lot of what we're dealing with advanced directives is the actual functions to keep the body alive. Now, brain dead scenarios, without a doubt, come into play, but not so much of the dementia, except it affects when and how you can make your wishes known.
I've talked to a couple of people who began to lose brain function, and they simply didn't want there to be as many interventions kind of once they were no longer aware of what was going on.
Yeah.
Once it was irreversible. And I think maybe that, to your point, that, you know, when you get to those places, not necessarily vegetative, but where you're not really aware of what's going on anymore, you can build that into an advanced directive, right?
Yeah. The biggest thing really is making your wishes known before you reach that point.
Right.
You know, because, for example, we have clients that have had dementia and had a cancer diagnosis, and they may not have been quite as aggressive in the care and treatment because the client simply just could not handle the illness that came with it, or the effects of the treatment. So that might certainly affect those scenarios. And if there is that diagnosis, that conversation will certainly come. From my point of view, the most important part is making sure we finalize your wishes before, you know, you're unable to do so and have the competency to do so.
When do people start thinking about these types of things? I know you mentioned hospice, you talked about social workers, but when are people doing these things? Probably not as soon as they should.
Honestly, my honest answer is after they've experienced it with somebody else. Mm-hmm. When they've had a parent die, they've had a sibling die, they've seen someone close to them pass and it left a huge estate mess, or there was constant chaos with the medical providers as to who to talk to and who was in charge. And then we've had a lot more recently employers that are willing to cover the cost for estate planning because they want to make sure their employees are set for whatever reason. You know, they want to make sure that the HR department is lined up with their estate planning. And so that's been an interesting twist lately, is having a lot more employers that are, you know, trying to connect their employees with estate planning.
What can someone expect when initiating this type of conversation? What should we be prepared with? Forms or questions, or how do we start? Because that could be really intimidating also.
You know, you mean before you call an attorney or to connect with an attorney?
Yeah, like I hear all this is amazing. I need to get started. What happens next? You
know, honestly, the first step is to make sure you know what you have and where it is. I am constantly shocked. And now granted, I do this day in and day out. So I know, and my poor husband, God bless him if something never happened to me, but I know exactly where everything is. And it's amazing to me how many people forget they had a 401k at a previous employer. They don't know who has their life insurance. I have spouses that have no clue the bank that holds their mortgage. And typically the conversation is, I'm 99% sure. Okay, well, if you're not sure and you don't have it all gathered and organized in one spot, guaranteed if something happens to you, your family is not going to know. There you go.
This is a great tool. You can get it on Amazon. It literally is called I'm Dead, Now What? And it has a tab for everything: personal, medical, dependents, documents, financial, business, everything. Yeah. If you have it, there's a place to write it down in here. Now this one's blank. I haven't filled it out yet because my husband has all the spreadsheets. I don't always know where everything is, but I actually got these for my parents. There's also one, I think a bank puts it together. It's something about your last love letter. Yeah, so it's very, very similar, where it's a place to put everything together. So,
I went to a event, and one of the things they said, it stuck with me years later. It stuck with me. They said the moment you're born, you start creating a paper trail. You get a birth certificate, social security card, all the way to the day you die, you have a paper trail. But we've gone so electronic that paper trail is disappearing for those that don't have access. So you get online bank statements, you get, you know, whatever it is, everything's online now, where we used to just tell clients, well, wait 3 months and you'll get a quarterly statement and things will cycle through and we'll see. People come and say, well, where were my mom's bank accounts? Where was this? There's no database I can just type in, unless I guess you're with the IRS. I don't have access to that, but to type in to know where all your bank accounts are. So really getting organized for yourself first so that it's in one place. And a book such as Abigail showed is fantastic. I don't want you to put in their passwords and full account numbers. I don't want you to have everything in one place that someone gets this notebook and has full access. It's really like creating a list of saying, hey, don't forget this person, that person, your financial advisor, your tax person. Hey, I see John Smith, here's his number. I see so-and-so, here's her number. You need to have all that information in place. So Laura, that's the first part, is that whole I'm 99% sure part always makes me nervous, because then it means they really don't know, and then no one else is going to know. So
Right.
getting that organized is really important. And having a general idea of who the people are you want to include. I have a lot of people that will call and we'll do an initial consultation. They do a lot of listening, but not so much talking. You've got to be prepared to talk. What's your relationship with your siblings? Why is this child getting, ousted, and this child's, I have to be able to know that dynamic. Things that are kind of extreme, as people say, I have 2 children where they actually have 3. They've just disowned the 3rd, but legally it's still a 3rd child. And so you've got to be comfortable being honest about the scenario and the dynamics of the family, because it doesn't, just because you don't say it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean it doesn't have to be dealt with.
Got it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's the emotional preparedness and there's the paperwork preparedness, so to speak, and being comfortable getting ready to have those conversations. But while you're alive, we still have the financial part to deal with. There's a form, which is a very general phrase called a power of attorney. So a power of attorney basically means you're naming someone as your agent to do something on your behalf. When you go to buy or sell a house, your real estate agent has a power of attorney to negotiate and talk and go through that process on your behalf. So power of attorney could be anything. I mean, believe it or not, even a valet with your car, you're giving them the authority to go park your car on your behalf, or a consignment shop when you go and resell clothes. I mean, so power of attorney is it's like saying contract. It could go a million different directions. But for estate planning, we're typically talking about a durable financial power of attorney. This, I will put a huge asterisk on this, is very dependent on state law. The laws vary greatly on the powers of attorney, what authority that agent has, when that authority kicks in. What I want to leave you with is that you're naming someone as an agent that at some point in time, they will have access to your bank accounts. And that's going to be a very discretionary power as to when and how that money is spent for your best interest. Now, it has to be spent for your interest and done for your benefit, but there's very little oversight for that. However, at least in the state of Florida, if we don't have a power of attorney and you are incapacitated, still alive, but incapacitated and cannot manage your own finances, they could appoint a guardianship, which means being under the court's purview. The court takes over the accounts. The court manages those things. That's a nightmare. That's an absolute nightmare. So we definitely want someone who's trustworthy. Your state will be very specific. It's going to vary from every state. I couldn't even give you much generalization on a power of attorney, but the power of attorney is an amazing tool if you have someone in your life you can trust with that power. I oftentimes have clients who have a power of attorney for their elderly parent, and they don't realize that power of attorney dies with the parent. That authority dies with that person. So it's important to understand that switch. What cares for you during lifetime does not take care of your assets after death. Those are 2 totally separate roles and separate documents.
Do you have any recommendations? This is kind of like a tangential question of, do you recommend getting in contact also with like family psychologists or anyone around helping you navigate how to come to terms with these decisions? I feel like by the time they come to see you, Anna, they should have some of these answers, but you're not necessarily the best person, or are you the best person to help us navigate who we assign these roles to? How do we come to terms with that accountability?
To be honest, I don't usually recommend that. If you need that personally to have a sounding board, absolutely. I do not recommend bringing the whole family in to make your decision for you. Hopefully that makes sense. So if you need someone to talk that out with and say, listen, I love my mom, but wow, she's bad with money and she could never be my agent. Those kind of conversations, have someone to be that sounding board. But to bring your mom in and then say, as an example, here's why I don't think you'd be a good job, a good job at this, but convince me otherwise. And then, you have to know in your heart what decisions you're making, and sometimes there's too much influence. I'm very strict on the parent making the decisions, and then we can include the adult children and what those decisions are. You know, and so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, sometimes we don't always know where to turn. It can be incredibly overwhelming, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know if everyone else has this experience that, you know, I have my own children, you know, married almost 18 years, but in my mother's eyes, I'm still 10, you know, so there's that, you know, they call it, I think, the powdered butt syndrome. You know, you're always going to be that person's baby. So you have to stand your ground and make your decisions and then kind of express what those are. But there's nothing wrong with getting some input, but it shouldn't be the decision-making process.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you.